Okay, so I'm going to be going over the lab that you're going to be doing this week. So for the bus out there, we're going to be cutting beams for the floor of the bus. So Robbie wanted me to reiterate some points to you guys on how to use that cold cut saw out there. Alright, so first of all, what we're going to need is 6.5 foot beam. That's going to be your long beam. So in the end game, you're going to need a long beam, short beam, short beam. Okay, so this one's going to be 6.5 feet, and these are going to be 2 feet. All right, so he wanted me to reiterate that 6.5 feet equals 6 feet 6 inches. Okay, so it's not 6.5, it is 6.5 feet, and that's going to be 6 feet, half a foot is 6 inches. Okay, you can't even see that at the bottom that I drew. I'll redraw it. So I just drew a beam. This is 6.5 feet, and then you're going to have 2 other beams on the side. I know I'm not a good drawer, but they're 2 feet. Okay, so it's going to look like a staple. That's how Robbie said it to me. It's going to just look like a little staple. The longer beam is going to be up top, and then you're going to have 2 side beams that are 2 feet. Alright, so some things to remember. So you're going to have 2 2-foot beams and 1 6.5 foot beam. Alright, so we need to keep it consistent with which material we're cutting the 2-foot beams from and which material we're cutting the 6.5 foot beams from. So you need to stay consistent. Because we don't have a lot of material to waste. So 2 foot needs to be the same material. And the 6.5 foot needs to be the same. So if somebody's already been cutting on a beam and it's the 2-foot beam, you need to use that one for the 2 feet. If somebody's already cut the 6.5 foot beam, you need to use that same beam until we run out of material. Alright. So if I was you, I would cut the 2-foot beam first. So you'll have to have, so imagine this is the beam right here. So right here you would have a 90 degree. And over here you would have a 45 degree. And then you would have another 90 degree. So in total, you're going to measure between these 2 points. So that should be 2 feet. Alright? So you're going to go 90, 45, 90, 45, 90, 45. Okay? So this is going to help you get prepared to do your 6.5 foot beam. So you've got 90 degrees, 45 degrees, and 90 degrees. And that's going to be, you're going to do that 2 times. So you need 2 of those right there. Then for your 6.5 foot beam, you're going to have 45 degrees, 45 degrees, 45 degrees. So every cut you do in that 6.5 foot beam is going to have to be 45 degrees. So you need to cut 45 degrees close to the edge if starting on a new stick. So that's why I put this right here. You need to cut it as close to the edge as you can to get it a 45 degree angle. And you don't need to change the saw back and forth. Like you don't need to go 45, 45, 45. You need to change the material. So you need to flip-flop the material back and forth. So start on this end and then flip it to do another 45 and vice versa. check it for the 45 and adjust, but you need to rotate and flip the stick instead. So you need to make sure that when you get on there, if you're starting to cut your 6.5 and somebody's went before you, you need to make sure they had a perfect 45, or you need to cut that and make sure it's a 45, or your measurements are going to be off. You also need to take into consideration that blade is 8 inches. Okay? So that's going to take off 8 inches of your measurement if you don't place that blade correctly. So on whichever side that you're cutting, you need to make sure that if you're cutting on this side, that you put the blade on that side of the line. If you measure 6.5 feet, you need to make sure it's on the right side of the line so that you're not going to lose 8 inches of your cut. And that's just going to be wasted material, and it's just going to be not useful. So take into consideration your blade makes up 8 inches, okay? So the end game of all this is we're eventually going to weld this frame onto the floor of that school bus. So it's going to look something like this. It's just going to have squares all down through there of these beams that we cut out. It's going to be in the walkway. And this is going to get it ready for the robot we're going to eventually put in there. But this is what it's going to look like. So just to know why you're doing this, there is an end game to it. So what you should have at the end is this right here. We've already talked about it up here. And of course, like, these need to equal. So this one up here should be 6.5 feet. And then we have our 2 feet and our 2 feet. And this corner right here should equal a perfect 90 degree. So that's why we're cutting them at 45 degree angles. We need them at perfect 90 degrees in the corners. So you need to use that square on that saw to make sure you are cutting perfect 45 degrees, okay? So just to reiterate, stay consistent. Use the same material for your 2 feet cuts and also your 6.5 feet cuts. Take into consideration your blade is 8 inches, okay? So whichever side you're cutting on, you need to make sure that that blade is in the proper place, or you're going to lose 8 inches off of your measurement. And like Robbie says, you need to measure 50 times, cut once. So he's reiterated that too. You need to measure, make sure it's good before you cut, because we don't have a lot of material. And you'll get graded on if your cut is accurate or not. So measure it 2, 3, 4 times, however many times you have to do to be comfortable, then cut it. So you need in total to have 2 2-feet cuts and 1 6.5 feet cuts, and that equals 6 feet 6 inches. And how you're going to cut the 2 foot is you're going to go 90 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 45 degrees. How you're going to cut the 6.5 is 45, 45, 45, 45. So, and we said don't move that saw every time. Once you get it to 45, you need to leave it that way. So you need to just flip your material. So flip the material, not the saw. Keep the same material for 2 foot and 6.5 feet. Stay consistent and take into consideration that your blade is 8 inches. And the last thing that we'll ask you to do this week is those pieces out there in front of the bus. That's the pieces we're going to be using to cut. And they're rusted. They've been rained on. And they're just not in the best condition. So, last step is going to be grind the pieces that you cut and get rid of rust so we can prep for the welding, okay? So get rid of the rust. And that's going to be it this week.